All right, we are on Chaf Hey Amud Aleph 25a. We 2 days ago we framed the question that's going to be discussed for the next little bit in the Gemara. Not too long, maybe 15 or so lines discussing the question, which is this woman who we said loses or forfeits her right to the ketubah on the grounds that she voluntarily left the religious context of their marriage. Veres aldas literally means she transgresses, violates the religion. There's a religious context to their marriage. She covers her hair. She doesn't sit publicly and flirtatiously with every passerby, but she decides she wants to take her own path in life. So we learned that this is grounds for divorce, and that she loses her right to the ketubah. And the question the Gemara posed is, well, what if the husband's okay with it and wants to keep on living with her? In other words, is this grounds for divorce, or are we encouraging and obligating him to divorce? Not that we're going to force his hand per se, I don't think, maybe, but the obligation would be there. Or is it simply, look, this is grounds for divorce, but if you decide you want to keep him, keep her, and keep her. It's at your discretion. This is.
Is he obligated to divorce her, or can he remain married?
That's right. Is this the sages saying, look, we understand this is something you might care about, so if you care about it, go ahead and divorce, and you don't have to pay the ketubah? Or are the sages saying, this is the kind of thing we expect you to care about, and therefore you ought to divorce now? That's the question. That's the question. So now the Gemara is going to.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if he decides, let's say the law is that he has this discretion to stay married to her, is it then one of those similar cases where Torah frowns upon the relationship, and therefore?
I don't really think so.
And therefore,
no.
She becomes a Sotah.
If we are saying that it's up to his discretion, then there's no legal reason to frown on his relationship. They're choosing to live together, good for them. If he is obligated to divorce, but doesn't, then maybe we would look at it in a frowning.
But in this case,
but we're not.
Lost her ketubah, right? They're living together, but she has no.
Okay, so if he decides to not care, I don't think she would be losing her ketubah. I don't think she would lose her ketubah. Yeah, I don't think.
It's not one of those cases where she loses it, but she's okay with it. He's okay with it.
I don't think so. I think the whole reason why she would lose the ketubah is because he cares. And if he doesn't care, I don't think she would lose her ketubah. That's just what I think. I'm just refreshing the page if it's not. That's better.
A ketubah is a party relationship, right?
That's right. If the ketubah exactly. The ketubah is a financial agreement between the husband and wife, and if they're in agreement, then the ketubah stands. That's what I would argue. Okay, so let's see. So having posed the question, the Gemara now cites to our Mishnah and tries to use our Mishnah as a manner to resolve the question. So the Gemara says, Tashma, come and listen to the following words of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah reads, the Elu, and the following are, Shebezdin mikanan lehen. The following are scenarios in which the Bezdin will step in and warn the wife against secluding herself with a man about which she's being suspicious. We discussed this previously, this quote from our Mishnah, which is when a husband, under the circumstances that we're about to describe, is incapable of issuing a warning to his wife and telling her not to behave, not to seclude herself with a certain person about which there is grounds for suspicion. It's because the husband is incapacitated, the Bezdin steps in and issues that warning. And these are the following scenarios in which the Bezdin will step in. Number one, Mishin is Chadish Baila, one whose husband became a mute. Or Nishtata, or the husband had some sort of mental nervous breakdown and is no longer capable of issuing such a warning. Or if he was locked in jail, we discussed this in the past, what that means. Doesn't necessarily mean he's a bad person. He just happens to be in jail because of the historical context of how Jews were treated by their neighbors.
A lot of times it's for lack of paying debts, right?
1,000 reasons.
Yeah.
So in these cases, the Beis Din steps in and issues the warning. End quote from our Mishnah. So now the Gemara is going to try to deduce from this Mishnah the law regarding whether or not the husband has the right to choose to stay with her. This is how the Gemara argues. The Amris, if you're to suggest that Rotza, Baal, Lakaima, that the husband, if he decides he wants to remain with her, Mekaima, he can keep her. Right? In other words, if it's up to his discretion, then why would the Beis Din step in the morning? Of the Beis Din, would the Beis Din do something? Media matter. The Dilma that perhaps that the husband may not want. In other words, if the law is that we expect you to divorce given the suspicions, behavior, then okay, that's why Beis Din steps in to issue the warning. Because the Beis Din, representing Jewish law, expects, demands even that there be a divorce, and therefore they step in to issue the warning to get that process in motion. So that there's a divorce and she loses her ketubah because of her misbehavior. But if it's up to the husband's discretion, if he wants to remain with her, he may, then why would the Beis Din overstep their place? It's not up to them to decide whether he wants to stay with her.
Can you separate the two issues, one being the ketubah and the other being the divorce? And that's the whole issue.
No, it's the whole issue. It's the whole issue. Divorce he can do anyway. The question is if he loses the ketubah, they're one and the same.
I would think also there's a difference between the person who's mute but of sound mind and the person who is.
Okay, that's a separate discussion. That's not the that's a good question. That's not.
If the court's a conservatorship for him, then he may not have an ability to make it.
So that's a good question, but that's not relevant to the discussion here. The point here is the very fact that the Beis Din is given the right to step in and begin the process of what might lead to the eventual divorce and her losing the ketubah. If the Beis Din is stepping in, it's because the Beis Din expects that this should happen. And if it's simply up to him to decide, then the Beis Din should stand back. Why would they do something that the husband can overrule? Yeah, it's not their place, not their place. So therefore, this the Gemara tries to suggest is proof positive that it's completely in the discretion of the husband. Because if it wasn't, the Beis Din wouldn't step in. Okay, and the fact that the Beis Din steps in, reverse. From the fact that the Beis Din steps in means it's not up to the husband. Because if it were up to the husband, the Beis Din wouldn't step in.
Yeah.
The fact that Beis Din steps in means that the Beis Din expects, and the law expects that this should happen, which is why the Beis Din is stepping in. So answers the Gemara, no. We cannot derive from here that the reason why the Beis Din is stepping in is because the law expects the divorce. That's not what's happening here. The reason why the Beis Din is stepping in is because stama de milsa, the presumption is kivan the iveres aldas, because she is leaving the religious context of the marriage. She's flirting with some random other guy. Haminach nichale. He is happy with it. In other words, the fact that the Beis Din is stepping in is not because they are beginning the process of a law that's supposed to happen, but rather they are stepping in because they safely assume the husband probably cares, and therefore they're going to step in to do him the favor, and not because the law expects that he has to, simply because we think he probably does care. And if he doesn't, okay, so then let him back out.
Wouldn't they have queried him first before they?
He's incapacitated. He's stuck in jail somewhere. He's has a nervous breakdown. That's the whole point. If he's capable of doing the warning, he'll do the warning himself. The scenario here is he's incapable of doing the warning, right? So we initially assume that the reason why the Beis Din is stepping in is because the Beis Din expects this to happen, and therefore they're stepping in as representative of the laws to implement that which should happen. Now we're saying no, they're stepping in just on the presumption that he probably wants us to do this, not because they have to do this.
Okay, presumption.
That's all. There's the distinction. So we don't have any.
So then afterwards he comes back.
One second. Let's allow the Gemara to roll out. Most of the questions will be answered if we let the Gemara flow, right? So at this point, we've come to the point where we don't have any definitive proof that it has to happen. Just because the Beis Din steps in, it doesn't mean that the Beis Din is beginning a process they expect to happen. It simply could be the presumption that probably he wants this. Now, if that's the case, the Gemara raises the following next question. The following inquiry was presented. Again, this word boilahu, which is an inquiry, meaning the questioner doesn't have any agenda. The questioner just wants to know. Namely, if the husband decides to, forgive, or machal means like, means forgive. He retracts his warning. So he issues a warning saying, do not seclude yourself with so-and-so. Or let's say he issues the warning that we described earlier. He issues a warning saying, stop behaving flirtatiously in public. Please stop, or we're going to have to go through this process of divorce, and you may have to lose your ketubah, and so on. So he issues the warning. But then he says, you know what, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. Forget what I said. Kinuy of machal, is his warning forgiven and taken back? Or perhaps, or it's not forgiven. Once the issue is warning, how do the kids say it? No take backsies. It's like you can't take it back. Right? And this follows from the question we just finished, as you were suggesting. The Gemara just finished saying that we have no proof positive that this has to happen. And maybe the reason why the Beis Din is stepping in is simply because we presume he wants it. If the Beis Din is stepping in because we presume he wants it, then that would mean if he was capable later of communicating, he can say, I'm sorry, Beis Din, you assumed I want it, but I don't want it. Take that back. So the question becomes, is that indeed a possibility? Can a husband take back a warning? Never mind the Beis Din's warning. His own. He issued a warning, but then later regrets it. Can he take it back? And here are the two sides to the coin. Miyaminon, do we say Bekinoi Debal Tala Rahmana? This entire thing, her misbehavior, his warning, the sight, all of it. The Torah is putting it in the hands of the husband or in the hands of the two of them. Do you want to take your wife through this process or not? And if you don't want to, don't. You're happy with her you're happy with her behavior? Good. Do as you will. And the Torah just gives you an option should you want to go through the process of divorce and losing the ketubah, considering that she is behaving in a manner that is suspicious. But if you don't want to, and you're happy with the way things are going, good. So you're happy. Is that the Torah's attitude? And therefore, Baal HaMachalei, and because the Torah's attitude is do as you will, husband, the option is available, but if you don't want it, don't take it, then he put it out there, he can take it back. L'chinuyav, to his warning. Ideal more, perhaps, Kivan de Kanale Mikara, because at the outset he began the process in motion, he can't take it back because the halachic process has begun. And once the halachic process has begun, the halacha takes over. You issued a warning. This begins the halachic process of either divorce and losing the ketubah or the whole site of proceeding. And once that process has begun, the halacha steps in and now the halacha operates. Or the entire premise of the halacha is an option to you, husband, and therefore if you decide to opt out, opt out. Right? The questions flow from each other. The first question, which was, right, can the husband remain married to her even after she misbehaves? That was the first question. That same question flows to the next question, which is, okay, if it's all about what he wants, then maybe he can undo the warning even after he issued it. Because why not? It's all up to him. Or perhaps no. There's a halachic standard here. And the halachic standard is you ought to divorce. And the halachic standard is also that if you warn, the halacha takes over and you can't do anything about it because you've already began the process. Right? We have it in modern law as well, where a person, presses charges. So what happens at that point? Right?
That's what the charges are.
Sorry?
It depends what the charges are.
That's right. So in some cases, we say that the person pressed charges because the entire charge is only because you pressed it. You decide to take it back, you can. And in some cases, we're sorry, you pressed charges. Now the law takes over and you can't. You decide you want to back out. Too bad. You've brought to the attention of the law some misdemeanor or some misbehavior or some unlawful activity. The fact that you brought it to our attention doesn't change the fact. You can walk off, but we're still going to prosecute.
Right.
And in some cases, it's all because you brought the problem to the court. You decide you don't have a problem anymore. Good. So take the court lets go of it, takes it back. We have such differences in the law. And the Gemara is asking if the same thing apply, which way, how do we perceive the question of these two issues? A, her misbehaving, her deciding to leave the confines of the religious context of the marriage, she's behaving flirtatiously and so on. Is that the kind of case where once the law is aware of it, it's too late, the law takes over, and now you ought to divorce and you ought to lose the ketubah? Is that the kind of case here? Or is it the kind of case where, no, I mean, it's up to you. You brought it to our attention, you want to keep her, fine, so you keep her, it's your issue. Same thing with the warning. He warns her not to seclude herself with a certain person. Is that his discretion? And if now he's okay with living with a woman who's suspicious of another man, then he can continue doing so, he can take back his warning? Or once you issue the warning and the issue has been brought to the attention of the law takes over, you step back, it makes a difference what you want, what you don't want, the law begins, and we have to go through with the proceeding of the Sotah. There's the two sides to the coin. Yeah.
Maybe, are we going to go through an incompatibility later on
In what?
of the two people? Let's say they get married, they always get married young. But what happens if one outgrows the other? In other words, one wants to be Orthodox and the other doesn't want to be Orthodox.
That's the question here, right? So, meaning voluntarily divorcing is not the problem. They can voluntarily divorce anytime they want for whatever reason they want. The question
But
is,
does she lose the ketubah?
so there's the question. If he's coming to the Beis Din and saying, this is kind of what Rabbi was saying also, if he comes to the Beis Din and says, look, she's misbehaving, I want to divorce her because of that. And they do an investigation, and it turns out she is misbehaving. Okay, so she loses her ketubah. But the Gemara is asking now, what if he says, you know what, I don't care, I want to stay with her anyway. Then why is she losing her ketubah? She doesn't lose her ketubah. Unless the law steps in and says, hold on a second, you brought to our attention that she's misbehaving. Now this is the law. You ought to divorce and she loses her ketubah. Whether you like it or not is irrelevant. The obligation is upon you, right? This is the question. Is it just a question of them outgrowing each other and then they voluntarily leave? And if they volunteer to stay, they stay. Or is the law saying, no, you ought to be separating and ought to divorce and ought to lose the ketubah? There's the two sides to the coin. Yeah, what do you say, Robert?
I was going to say, the issue of whether or not the warning is retractable.
Yeah.
Isn't the case between a regular case and a case of these three scenarios of the person who's incapacitated?
Yeah.
I mean, if the court is stepping in the warning, perhaps in that scenario, in those cases, it's retractable, the warning. Because it was a presumption that wasn't really the intent of the person once he's able to come forward.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But the person who is of sound mind or whatever and does the actual warning, then maybe in that case.
That's a good point. But the question will still stand. So in other words, I suggested a link between the two questions, and you're saying not necessarily is there a link.
I just say there's
Separate questions.
Actually so different that
Yeah,
it's hard to
I can accept
compare
that.
both cases.
I can accept that. So if we were to separate between the case of the Beis Din stepping in versus he
Yeah.
himself issuing a warning, the question will still stand: can he retract it or not?
Yeah.
It's just I linked the two, and you're separating the two, which is fine. I can
Yeah.
accept that. I'm suggesting a continuous discussion because the Gemara doesn't put any stop to the original question.
Sure.
But it's very possible that the questions are separate. Yes. Good point. Yes. Valid point. Okay, so Tashma, the Gemara now says to resolve this question about whether or not the warning that a husband issues is retractable or not, the Gemara again cites to our Mishnah, the very same passage in our Mishnah, and tries to use that as proof. So Tashma, come and listen to the following quote from our Mishnah, which reads the same text. The Elu and the following are scenarios in which Shebezdin Mikanan Lahen, where the Bezdin steps in and issues the warning in the place of the husband. This is the same quote. So Mishin is Chadash Baila, one whose husband has become mute, or Nishtata, or he's had some sort of mental nervous breakdown, or more if he was put in jail. Okay, so now, how does this quote help us understand whether or not the husband's warning is retractable? So I'm not so sure where the Gemara stands on your question, Robert. Let's see here.
Maybe that's an
Yeah.
answer.
Let's see. Not really, but let's see. So the Amris, if you're going to suggest that Baal Shemachal, a husband who retracts the warning, Al Kinuyav, he forgives his warning, he retracts his warning. Kinuyav Machal, his warning is indeed retracted. So if that's the case, Abdinon Midi, would the Bezdin do something, the Asi Baal, that the husband can then later come and Mochalei and retract? Yeah, that's the Gemara's presumption. So now what the Gemara's presumption is I suggested to link the two. If the Bezdin steps in and issues a warning, it's because it's irretractable. I'm sorry, because it is retractable. Because why would the Bezdin do something?
It's retractable?
Yeah, otherwise, why would the Bezdin do something? Sorry, it means it isn't retractable. Because why would the Bezdin do something that the husband can take back?
Right,
It's a useless,
it
would have no force if the husband can take it back. So it must be the Bezdin can't take it back. Answers the Gemara to your point. We're going on a presumption that the husband would be happy with what the Bezdin is doing. But in theory, the husband could take it back. Or maybe even further, like you're saying, Robert, when the Bezdin steps in, the husband can take back. But when he himself does it, maybe he can't take back.
That's what I was
Right? So I can see the Gemara both ways here. I think about the Gemara is saying that because the Bezdin is stepping in only on his presumption, that probably he wants it, right? Therefore,
He doesn't want it.
one second, no, therefore, that would be indicative of the fact that,
It's retractable.
one second, that it's not retractable.
It's not.
Yeah, because because the Bezdin is doing it on the assumption that he probably wants it. But once it's done, it's done.
That's the different position.
Yeah. Or the Gemara is saying, no, sorry, Rashi doesn't learn that way. Rashi learns the other way. That because the Bezdin is only going, that perhaps he wants it, therefore if he wants it, he can come and retract it. But it's possible, Rashi seems to be learning the way you're learning, which is it's possible that if the husband issues the warning, no retraction. And the retraction is only when the Bezdin does it, because they're only going on a presumption. So all to say, we still have no indication as to whether or not the warning is retractable. And we also still have no indication as to whether or not he's allowed to stay with her, because it's up to his discretion, or is he being told you have to? Because the fact that the Bezdin steps in doesn't tell us anything. The Bezdin is just going on a presumption. Not because they're going with the law. They're going with the presumption. And if they're going with the presumption, then when the husband later is let's say he's healed from his illness or he's come out of jail, he can say, sorry, I would have never issued that warning, take it back. And the Bezdin says, okay, we're going on a presumption, which turns out to be wrong. Okay, we're wrong. But if the husband steps in and issues a warning, or if we have a situation in which a woman is left religiosity, then the obligation falls upon him to go through with either the process of the Sotah or the process of divorce and losing the ketubah.
If he so chooses.
Yeah.
What happens if he's jailed for 10 years and she decides that she can't go on like this? She needs a partner.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very difficult thing. And the proper way to do this would be the Bezdin would step in before he gets put away and makes him issue a divorce then.
So they make him,
Yeah,
so she gets the tuba.
we're talking about 56, you're talking about 300, 400, 500 years ago. If there's no visits, nothing. The guy was dumped in a pit somewhere and you never saw him again.
What do you mean no visits?
We're in medieval Europe. Yeah, have fun with your visits in medieval Europe.
Really?
He's probably.
Yeah, I mean, never mind medieval Europe. We're going even farther back. We're going back to,
3,000
here we're going back almost 2,000 years.
2,000 years.
Conjugal visits, not convinced that was a thing.
No?
No.
And he probably
Either way, I mean, the
suggested
truth is
that-
it's a very big problem. It's the issue of aguna, and there's tons of literature in this, and finding ways to help the woman be freed of the marriage when it comes to such things. Maybe trying to find, if the husband is presumed dead, is he not presumed dead? Do we have any proof that he's dead or not proof that he's dead? Can we send messengers down there to pick up a divorce bill from him to get witnesses to witness
You
him?
only need one witness, though, right?
If that, well, it has to be written properly. You need a scribe who can write it with the proper intent and so on and so forth. This is not an easy scenario, and there's hundreds of pages of responds to literature, thousands probably,
And what's the
dealing with these kinds of
modern-day
cases.
scenario for the Sotah drinking the water today?
Today there is none.
I know. but-
I mean, the Gemara does say that, it's in God's hands, and if God decides that someone needs to be treated like a Sotah, he'll do that. But there's no official proceeding for it, no. Other than if there's real grounds for suspicion, then you can divorce.
I'd have to-
Sorry?
I'd have to call-
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we're gonna stop over here, and the Gemara tomorrow is going to introduce another part of our Mishnah that hopefully indicates that retraction cannot be issued. And the Gemara's proof is going to be, remember, we learned that when the warning is issued and they go to the local court who says, okay, take her to the temple, right? We send along with them 2 scholars to accompany them on their journey. What's the purpose of the two scholars?
Make sure they don't do anything.
To make sure that they're not intimate. Well, if he's allowed to retract, then why not just retract and be intimate? Why not? If you're allowed to retract, then what do you have to make sure that they're not being intimate for? Good, let them retract, let them be intimate, to go home and be happily married. What do we care?
So it seems
Ah,
like
means-
that is the proof of
seems like,
retraction.
Seems like you can't retract, which is why the 2 scholars are there to make sure that they'll misbehave, because once the process began, we can undo it. If he can undo it, let him undo it. That's what the Gemara is going to suggest tomorrow, and we're going to go back and forth in that discussion. And we're going to get into other cases in which there are mitzvahs that are, there are halachic proceedings that are initiated by the parties, and the Gemara is going to discuss can retract, like the law of the rebellious son. It's initiated by the parents bringing the rebellious son to the court. Can the parents retract? The issue of the rebellious scholar, which is initiated by the court, who tells the scholar, you've been misbehaving. Can the court then retract? Various different scenarios in which the halachic proceeding is initiated by someone who's been perturbed, and because it was only up to his being annoyed, can he now retract it? Or once the halachic proceeding begins, the person's been left out of the situation and the court takes over. Like we were discussing before, there's different types of scenarios, even in modern law, where once
There's a
charges are
balance
pressed.
between public protection versus private.
That's right.
Relationship.
That's right. Private relationships versus public protection is actually going to come straight up. The Gemara is going to discuss. That's right. The Gemara is going to discuss where scenarios might cause public unrest. Then even if the parties want to retract, we still have to go through with the process, because otherwise it's going to cause public unrest. So that is going to come up later. Yeah. Okay. Have a wonderful day. And
God bless you all the very best. You have a very good day. Yeshikoach, Rabbi. And all the very best to you all. Have a wonderful day. Blessed day. God bless.